Bob Beckel,
This is Cal Thomas, a conservative who is pro-life,
a liberal who once worked for Jimmy Carter,
who favors smaller government,
who believes in big government.
and in a town full of cheap shot artists, I've never heard Cal take a cheap shot.
But even when he's wrong, he's likable. And this is Common Ground.
And this is Common Ground.
Welcome once again to Common Ground, a video version of Bob Beckel's and my bi-weekly USA Today column in which we try to figure out how to bridge Washington's partisan divide. Now, Bob, I always, well, most of the time, okay, sometimes, regard you as an honest guy when presented with the facts. Even the facts when they come from my perspective. You're honest enough to open up and say, you know, you're really right about that. And we've done this Common Ground column long enough for me to know that that's one of the things I admire the most about you. Now, I think you will agree with me that the government is so big and doing so many things that it ought not to be doing, that there's room to cut some of these agencies and federal regulations, wouldn't you?
You know, I should have known with that nice introduction that we were going to get right to cutting government. But you know, the fact is, even as a liberal, I got to concede, it's gotten way out of control. I mean, the federal government has gotten so big, and it has been big not because of just liberals, but because of special interest groups all across the country that support these things. I'll tell you, let's think about some places we might want to cut. I would put on top of that list agricultural supports, about $180 billion a year. And those are mostly going to those big agribusinesses.
I agree.
And who supports that? Conservatives and liberals, depending on what kind of agriculture they've got in their district. That would be a place to cut.
Well, you're right, Bob. I did some research on this, and it turns out there's one employee in the agriculture department for every 10 farmers in America, and not all of them are dealing with farm issues. Some are involved in food stamps and other things. I'll tell you some other federal agencies that need to be cut. Housing and Urban Development, that's just a total joke. Veterans Administration should be rolled back into the Defense Department. And there are a lot of others out there that, you know, Reagan used to say the only proof of eternal life in Washington is a government program.
Well, not that I want to quote or rely on Ronald Reagan on this, but look, let's take a look at a couple of departments. So we can agree on agriculture.
Yeah.
I agree on housing. And look, it's a lot of the housing initially came into effect during the Great Society, and frankly, those days are behind us now. But there is in the Department of Education something that was created when I was in the Carter White House, by the way.
Yes.
It has now gotten out of control. It's gotten way too big. And I think what ought to happen is a lot of the Department of Education ought to be cut and the money sent back to the state so the teachers can get a better salary.
Well, I agree. And not only teachers' better salaries, but more local control. We don't need a one-size-fits-all dictated from Washington for what the schools are going to be teaching in Walla Walla, Washington. But look, here's something else. I know we both agreed on this before because we've written about it in the newspaper. This whole faith-based initiative thing, this whole idea that government money ought to be going to religious institutions to advance a kingdom not of this world. Government should have nothing to do with any of this. Churches used to, as they say, pray the money in. They don't need Washington praying, P-R-E-Y, on them.
You know, there was an announcement made, I think in the last year of the Bush administration, that said that there was upwards of $40 billion available to faith-based initiatives. Now, if you believe in separation of church and state, as you and I both do, this ought to be as clear a line as you could possibly have, where you should not have federal money going into church-based organizations. And beyond that, who makes the choice of which churches get them? I mean, that's the problem. Depending who, it's a lot of politics in that, and faith does not deserve to be politicized. So I could agree with you more on that. But let's touch one that's usually a holy grail for you right wingers, and that is the Defense Department. That they have gotten bloated. Now, granted, they're fighting two wars. I understand that, but fortunately, they did away with the F-22 Raptor, which was an airplane that was not necessary, and I give Defense Secretary Gates credit for that, and Barack Obama. But they're building a lot of F-35s, for example, hundreds of millions of dollars, and to fight a war with the Russians that we're not going to be fighting.
Well, at least not now. But the problem with a lot of our defenses is that you don't know what it is you're going to face 10 years from now. You can't just order up a battleship overnight. You can't order up a fighter plane overnight. However, I do agree with you that there are a lot of members of Congress who are more interested, it appears, in defending their seats than they are in defending the country. And there is tremendous waste, fraud, and abuse in the Pentagon.
Or defending producers of armaments in their districts that the Defense Department doesn't want.
Exactly.
I mean, the Defense Department hasn't asked for submarines, but they keep the Congress keeps sending them submarines.
Well, that's so they can put women on them.
Well, there you go. That wouldn't be a bad shipmate to have. But listen, we cut through all this. We can find a lot of agreement here and things that we can cut. But in the end, if we're really going to somehow get on the road to balancing this terrible deficit, it's going to require taking on entitlements. And you and I have talked about this in the past. Social Security, when it was originally founded, the life expectancy of people was much lower than it is now. And yet the age has not increased all that much. I think you need to increase the age of being able to receive Social Security to 70, and you ought to have means testing for it.
I agree with that. And I think one other thing that would actually work to cut the size, scope, and reach of government is that many of these agencies, including cabinet-level agencies, ought to be required to come before Congress every, 4, 6, 8, 10 years maximum, and re-justify their existence. Again, there's no divine or other right for an agency or institution once created to go on in perpetuity. We all know that they attract a lot of lobbyists and a lot of supporters and a lot of employees, but that is no justification that they exist forever.
All right, but so let's wrap this up. We can agree on a lot of cuts in agriculture and education, probably some in the Defense Department. These agencies should come up and justify their existence. I'm going to end with one thing we're not going to agree on, which is that we're going to have to put taxes on the table. At some point here, you're not going to be able to cut enough to make this budget come into balance, and we're going to have to deal with the revenue.
I'm for putting taxes on the table, cutting taxes on the table.
Well, that's exactly what I thought. Hey, look, check out our column in the paper and on USA Today's opinion blog at usatoday.com. Thanks for tuning in, and come back again for the next installment of Common Ground.